The quietest knock can become the loudest turning point in a person's life when it arrives carrying someone else's impossible hope. The storm had swallowed nearly every sound across the Montana mountains except the steady pounding of rain against the roof of Nathan Brooks's small log cabin. Wind pushed through the towering pine trees with a deep, mournful howl, shaking branches that had stood through decades of harsh winters. Lightning briefly painted the valley in silver before darkness returned, leaving only the warm glow from the cabin windows to challenge the endless night. Nathan tightened the last loose board on the front porch before gathering his tools. At 39 years old, he had learned that storms never waited for convenient moments. Neither did life. His plaid flannel shirt was damp from the rain, his work boots covered in mud, and his tired hands carried the marks of years spent repairing everything that his modest income could not replace. Inside the cabin, 8-year-old Emma sat beneath a warm blanket, reading one of her favorite library books, while a pot of homemade vegetable soup simmered quietly on the stove. Their home was simple, peaceful, and filled with the kind of warmth that money could never purchase. Nathan reached for the porch light switch just as 3 firm knocks echoed through the storm. They were calm, deliberate, and strangely confident despite the weather. He frowned. Hardly anyone drove this mountain road after sunset, especially during a storm strong enough to flood creeks and wash gravel from the narrow trails. He opened the front door carefully. Standing beneath the porch roof was a woman whose expensive dark coat could not hide the rain soaking every inch of her clothing. Water dripped from loose strands of blonde hair as she struggled to catch her breath. Her face reflected exhaustion more than fear, yet there remained an unmistakable strength behind her blue eyes. She appeared accustomed to solving impossible problems, but tonight something larger than success had brought her here. "Are you Nathan Brooks?" she asked. Nathan studied her quietly before answering. "I am." She nodded once, as though confirming the final piece of a long search. "My name is Victoria Hayes." The name meant nothing to Nathan. He simply waited for her to continue. She looked beyond him toward the warm light inside the cabin before speaking again. "I know this sounds unbelievable, but if sunrise comes before I find what I came here for, more than 10,000 families could lose their future." Thunder rolled across the mountains, swallowing the last words of her sentence. Nathan did not ask who she was or why she had chosen his home. Instead, he noticed that her hands were trembling from the cold. Behind him, Emma appeared in the hallway, holding a folded towel almost as large as she was. She looked curiously toward the stranger standing in the rain. "Daddy," she whispered softly, "she looks freezing." Nathan glanced toward his daughter before returning his attention to Victoria. He stepped aside and held the door open. "Come inside before the storm makes your night even worse." Victoria hesitated for only a second, almost surprised that no questions had been asked. She crossed the threshold while Emma quietly offered her the dry towel with both hands. "Thank you," Victoria said, her voice softer now. Emma smiled gently. "Daddy says people should get warm before they explain hard things." Nathan closed the door behind them as another blast of wind rattled the windows. The cabin suddenly felt even smaller, but strangely more significant, as though the storm had carried far more than rain across the mountains that night. Victoria looked around the humble room filled with worn furniture, family photographs, neatly stacked firewood, and quiet dignity. She realized that everything she had spent months searching for might have begun inside the simplest home she had ever entered. Nathan placed another log into the fireplace until the gentle, crackling warmth filled every corner of the cabin. Emma quietly poured a steaming cup of herbal tea and carried it toward Victoria with careful hands, smiling as though welcoming unexpected guests during storms was the most ordinary thing in the world. Victoria accepted the cup with sincere gratitude before wrapping both hands around it, allowing the heat to slowly chase away the cold that had settled deep into her bones. For several moments, nobody spoke. Only the rain drummed steadily across the roof while the old grandfather clock in the corner marked each passing second. Nathan finally took a seat across from Victoria without any sign of urgency. He had spent enough years raising Emma alone to understand that frightened people often needed patience before they could find the right words. Victoria looked around the modest cabin once more. Every shelf held books that had clearly been read many times. Family photographs captured birthdays, fishing trips, snowy mornings, and simple moments that money could never duplicate. Nothing appeared expensive, yet everything carried unmistakable care. She lowered her eyes before speaking. My grandfather built a small engineering company almost 60 years ago. He believed every employee deserved respect before profit. He spent his life protecting families instead of chasing headlines. Nathan listened quietly. Victoria continued. After he passed away, I inherited the company. I believed I understood everything he wanted, but several months ago, I discovered letters suggesting he had hidden something before his death. Every clue led to one name. She paused, meeting Nathan's calm eyes. Yours. Nathan frowned gently. I have never met your grandfather. That is exactly what confused me, Victoria replied. She reached inside a leather document case and carefully unfolded an aged piece of paper protected inside a clear sleeve. The handwriting was elegant despite its age. Near the bottom appeared one sentence that had refused to leave her thoughts for months. If the day ever comes when my family loses sight of why this company exists, find Nathan Brooks in the Montana mountains. Trust his judgment before your own. Nathan stared at the paper in complete silence. He searched his memory for any connection but found nothing. Emma leaned closer, reading only enough to recognize her father's name. Daddy, she asked softly, how could someone know you if you never met? Nathan slowly shook his head. I honestly do not know. Victoria carefully returned the document to its sleeve. There is more. She removed a weathered map showing old property boundaries deep in the mountains. A hand-drawn circle surrounded an abandoned stone bridge less than 12 miles from the cabin. Beneath it was another handwritten instruction. Do not open the hidden compartment alone. Nathan Brooks must stand beside you. Victoria took a slow breath before continuing. I searched everywhere for an explanation. Lawyers found nothing. Historians found nothing. Even my grandfather's closest friends had never heard your name. Nathan remained thoughtful instead of impressed. Then why come tonight during a storm? Victoria smiled faintly for the first time. Because tomorrow morning my board plans to approve changes that my grandfather spent his entire life trying to prevent. If that hidden compartment contains what he believed it did, thousands of employees and their families may still have a future. Emma quietly looked from Victoria to her father before saying something neither adult expected. Grandpa always said storms help people find the roads that sunshine hides. Nathan looked at his daughter with gentle surprise. She was repeating words from his own late father, words she had memorized years earlier. Victoria's eyes widened. The sentence matched another handwritten note folded inside her grandfather's journal almost word for word. In that quiet cabin, while rain continued falling across the mountains, all three suddenly realized that this journey had begun long before any of them understood why. Nathan folded the weathered map with careful hands before placing it beside the fireplace. He looked through the rain-covered window toward the dark mountains where the abandoned stone bridge rested somewhere beyond the endless forest. The bridge had been standing long before he was born. His father had taken him there as a child during quiet fishing trips, warning him that the old structure was beautiful but unstable after decades of harsh winters. Nathan had not walked that trail in years. Victoria quietly checked her watch. The glowing numbers reminded her that dawn was moving closer with every passing minute. If we leave now, we should reach the bridge before first light, she said softly. Nathan nodded once. Then we should not waste time. Emma immediately stood from her chair. I can help pack. She disappeared into the small kitchen and returned with a paper bag filled with homemade sandwiches, apples, bottled water, and a flashlight with fresh batteries. Nathan smiled proudly. His daughter had learned that every journey deserved preparation, no matter how unexpected. Within minutes, he slipped into a heavier canvas jacket, grabbed another flashlight, and collected a small tool bag that rarely left his old pickup truck. Victoria watched every movement with quiet curiosity. Nothing about Nathan suggested excitement over being connected to a billionaire family or a mysterious inheritance. His attention remained on practical details, making certain everyone would stay warm, safe, and ready for the long drive through the mountains. That simple focus impressed her more than any business achievement she had witnessed inside polished boardrooms. Outside, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle, but thick fog rolled across the narrow road like slow-moving waves. Nathan started the aging pickup truck after the second turn of the key. The familiar engine rumbled confidently despite its years. Emma hugged her father tightly before stepping back beneath the porch light. "Please be careful," she whispered. Nathan gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "Mrs. Wilson will be awake before long. Stay with her until I come home." Emma nodded with complete trust. She had grown up believing that promises made by her father were stronger than storms. Victoria looked toward the little girl before quietly saying, "Thank you for helping a stranger tonight." Emma smiled with remarkable sincerity. "Daddy says strangers are only people whose stories we have not heard yet." Victoria carried those words silently as she climbed into the passenger seat. The pickup rolled slowly onto the muddy mountain road while the cabin lights faded behind them. For several miles, neither of them spoke. The windshield wipers moved steadily back and forth as towering pine trees passed through the dim beams of the headlights. Eventually, Victoria broke the silence. "You have not asked how much my company is worth." Nathan kept his eyes on the winding road. "I do not see how that would help us reach the bridge." She looked at him with quiet surprise. "Most people ask within the first 5 minutes." Nathan smiled gently. "Money explains many things, but it does not explain character." His answer lingered between them longer than either expected. As they rounded a sharp curve overlooking a narrow valley, Nathan suddenly eased off the accelerator. Fresh tire tracks cut deeply through the wet gravel ahead, leading toward the abandoned bridge. He stopped the truck and stepped into the cool morning air, kneeling beside the road. The impressions were crisp, untouched by fresh rainfall, which meant another vehicle had passed only a short time earlier. Victoria joined him, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Nathan studied the tracks for another moment before quietly standing. "We are not the first people heading there tonight," he said. Without another word, both understood that the mystery waiting beneath the old stone bridge had already drawn someone else out of the darkness. The muddy trail narrowed as Nathan guided the old pickup beneath towering pine trees that had watched over these mountains for generations. Dawn was still hidden beyond the eastern ridgeline, leaving the forest wrapped in cool gray mist and the soft rhythm of dripping rainwater falling from heavy branches. Victoria studied the landscape through the passenger window. Nothing about the place suggested that the future of a major company could somehow be connected to an abandoned bridge forgotten by nearly everyone. Yet every mile strengthened the feeling that her grandfather had planned this journey with remarkable precision long before either of them understood its purpose. Nathan finally brought the truck to a stop beside a weathered wooden fence almost reclaimed by wild grass. Beyond it stood the old stone bridge, stretching across a narrow creek whose clear water flowed gently beneath smooth rocks polished by decades of mountain seasons. The bridge looked worn but proud, carrying the quiet dignity of something built to last rather than impress. Nathan grabbed both flashlights and handed one to Victoria before they carefully walked across the damp ground. Every step echoed softly in the still morning air. As they reached the center of the bridge, Nathan knelt beside the moss-covered stone wall and slowly brushed away years of dirt with his work gloves. His fingers paused against a smooth, rectangular section that looked almost identical to the surrounding stones, except for one narrow, seam barely visible beneath the moss. Victoria immediately unfolded the old map. The faded markings pointed directly to the place where Nathan rested his hand. "This is it," she whispered. Nathan carefully reached into his tool bag and removed a small flat pry tool. With steady patience, he worked around the hidden edge until the stone panel loosened with a deep, quiet click. Behind it rested a compact steel lockbox protected inside a dry stone compartment untouched by moisture despite the passing years. Victoria held her breath as Nathan gently lifted the box into the morning light. The steel showed signs of age, but remained remarkably well preserved. There was no lock. Instead, a handwritten label simply read, "For the day truth becomes more valuable than comfort." Nathan slowly opened the lid. Inside rested a neatly organized leather journal, several sealed envelopes, carefully folded legal documents, and a small protective case containing what appeared to be an old storage drive. Nothing looked damaged. Nothing appeared missing. Yet Nathan's attention drifted away from the contents. Along the inner edge of the stone compartment, he noticed something unusual. He slowly aimed his flashlight toward the back wall. A fresh handprint stood clearly against the thin layer of dust that covered the hidden space. The outline was sharp, untouched by time, and far newer than anything else inside the compartment. Victoria immediately saw it as well. "Someone has already been here," she said quietly. Nathan nodded, but remained calm. He examined the compartment more closely before speaking again. "Maybe." Victoria looked at him with confusion. Nathan pointed toward the journal and the envelopes. "If someone came looking for money, everything would be gone. If someone wanted to destroy evidence, these papers would not still be here." He gently touched the edge of the fresh handprint without disturbing it. Whoever opened this compartment came searching for something very specific. Victoria slowly looked back into the steel box. Every document remained perfectly arranged, as though someone had carefully respected her grandfather's intentions. She reached for the leather journal with both hands, noticing another folded note resting beneath it. Unlike the older papers, this one looked surprisingly clean. Across the front appeared only 6 carefully written words in familiar handwriting. "You finally brought the right person here." Victoria looked toward Nathan in complete silence. The forest remained perfectly still around them, as though even the mountains had been waiting for that single sentence to be read aloud. Victoria carefully unfolded the fresh note while Nathan held the flashlight steady. The handwriting matched the elegant script from her grandfather's earlier letter without question. She quietly read the first sentence aloud. "If you were reading this beside Nathan Brooks, then you chose trust over convenience, and that decision alone tells me there is still hope." The words settled over the quiet forest like the morning mist drifting above the creek. Victoria lowered the page, unable to hide the emotion growing behind her calm expression. Nathan remained silent, giving the letter the respect it deserved. She continued reading. "Nathan, we have never shaken hands, yet I have known your character for many years. There are people whose names become famous because of their success, and there are people whose names deserve to be remembered because they quietly make other lives better. You belong to the second group." Nathan looked away toward the flowing creek, uncertain how a man he had never met could write with such confidence about his life. Victoria turned the page and found another explanation. Her grandfather described traveling through Montana several times after retiring from daily business operations. During those visits, he often stopped in small towns instead of expensive resorts because he believed character was easier to discover where nobody expected recognition. One autumn afternoon, he had watched a young father pull his pickup onto the shoulder of a country road to help an elderly couple whose truck had broken down. The father refused payment, repaired the vehicle himself, and drove away before learning either of their names. That father had been Nathan. Another entry described Nathan organizing neighbors after a severe snowstorm so that elderly residents received firewood before anyone worried about clearing their own driveways. Another recorded how Nathan quietly coached local children in baseball every summer after long work days because he believed every child deserved encouragement regardless of talent. None of those moments had ever appeared in newspapers. Nathan had never spoken about them because, to him, they had simply been the right things to do. Victoria's grandfather had watched from a distance, saying nothing, writing everything. The final pages became even more personal. "Victoria, companies do not fail because they lose money. They fail because they forget why they were built. I found it our so ordinary families could sleep peacefully knowing honest work would always matter. If leadership ever values numbers more than people, Nathan will recognize the difference before anyone inside a boardroom does. Listen to him, even if his answer is uncomfortable. Victoria slowly closed the journal for a moment. Her grandfather had not chosen Nathan because of education, wealth, or influence. He had chosen him because quiet integrity could not be purchased or inherited. Nathan finally spoke in his calm voice. Your grandfather believed people reveal themselves during ordinary days, not extraordinary ones. Victoria smiled through growing emotion. That sounded exactly like him. Nathan carefully lifted the stack of legal documents resting beneath the journal. Hidden underneath was a sealed envelope addressed only to Victoria in the same familiar handwriting. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside rested the original company charter bearing her grandfather's signature along with handwritten amendments that had never been filed publicly. Attached was a brief note. The board cannot erase what was never surrendered. These pages preserve the promise we made to every employee on the first day this company opened its doors. Beneath the charter lay the small protective storage case. Nathan opened it carefully and discovered a neatly labeled drive accompanied by a handwritten instruction. This contains the conversations that explain everything. Truth deserves witnesses. Victoria looked at Nathan with quiet determination, replacing uncertainty. The storm that had brought her to his cabin no longer felt like an accident. It felt like the final step in a journey her grandfather had begun years before, trusting that one humble father living in the Montana mountains would someday help protect thousands of families without ever asking for recognition in return. Nathan carefully returned every document to the steel lockbox before carrying it back toward the pickup. The morning sky was beginning to brighten behind the mountains, replacing the storm clouds with soft bands of pale gold stretching across the horizon. The forest felt different now, no longer mysterious, but quietly expectant, as though the truth hidden beneath the old bridge had finally found the people it had been waiting for. Victoria sat silently in the passenger seat with the leather journal resting on her lap. She turned each page once more while Nathan guided the truck along the muddy road. The entries became increasingly detailed during the final years of her grandfather's life. He had documented every board meeting that slowly shifted the company's priorities away from employees and towards short-term financial victories. Every concern he raised had been carefully recorded. Every warning had been dated. Every recommendation had been preserved with remarkable clarity. Nathan glanced toward the journal during a long curve in the road. He never stopped believing people could choose a better path. He observed quietly. Victoria nadith, even when nobody listened. A few miles later, they reached a scenic overlook where the first sunlight illuminated the valley below. Nathan parked the truck so Victoria could organize the documents before returning to the city. She opened the protective case containing the storage drive. Inside rested a second folded note written in the same familiar handwriting. Do not fear the conversations inside this drive. They are not preserved to embarrass anyone. They exist to remind honest people that promises matter even after voices grow silent. Victoria carefully placed the drive in her laptop. Several audio recordings appeared, each labeled with dates spanning nearly a decade. She selected the earliest file. Her grandfather's calm voice immediately filled the quiet truck. He spoke about leadership as a responsibility rather than a privilege. He reminded future executives that every business decision eventually reached a family dinner table somewhere through the lives of ordinary employees. Profit, he explained, should reward good stewardship, never replace compassion. Nathan listened without interruption. The wisdom sounded less like corporate strategy and more like lessons a father would share with his children. Victoria continued through additional recordings. Each conversation revealed thoughtful discussions with advisors, attorneys, and longtime executives who had originally helped build the company. Together, they documented why certain employee protections had been written into the company's earliest governing documents. Near the final recording, her grandfather spoke directly to Victoria. If this message reaches you, then circumstances have become more difficult than I hoped. Remember that courage is often quiet. The right decision may cost popularity, but will never cost your self-respect. Victoria closed the laptop slowly. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sadness alone, but from relief that his voice had survived long enough to guide her once again. At that exact moment, her cell phone vibrated across the dashboard. The screen displayed several missed calls, followed by an urgent message from the corporate board. The emergency meeting had been moved forward by 2 hours because several directors wanted to finalize restructuring plans before public markets opened. Victoria read the message twice before looking toward Nathan. They're trying to finish everything before anyone can question it. Nathan simply started the truck again. Then we should arrive before they do. As they drove toward the city, another notification appeared from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no signature, only a single sentence. Bring the original charter into the boardroom and place it beside the founder's portrait before anyone begins speaking. Victoria looked around instinctively, but the road remained empty except for morning sunlight washing across the mountains. Nathan noticed her thoughtful expression. Another message? She nodded. Someone knows exactly what we found. Nathan remained calm as always. Maybe they had been waiting for someone willing to listen. Neither of them knew who had sent the anonymous message, but both understood one simple truth. The journey through the storm had uncovered far more than hidden documents. It had awakened a promise that refused to disappear, and before the morning ended, that promise would quietly step into a room where thousands of futures depended upon whether truth still carried enough weight to be heard. The city skyline slowly replaced the endless mountain ridges as Nathan guided his weathered pickup toward the headquarters of Hayes Industries. Tall glass buildings reflected the bright morning sun, creating a world that felt completely different from the quiet forest they had left behind only hours earlier. Victoria looked out the window, realizing how strange the contrast appeared. Inside one vehicle sat a billionaire chief executive officer wearing yesterday's rain-soaked business clothes beside a single father whose boots still carried traces of mountain mud. Yet for the first time in many months, appearances seemed less important than purpose. They stopped briefly at a quiet parking area a few blocks from the corporate tower so Victoria could organize the journal, the original company charter, the sealed envelopes, and the storage drive. Nathan carefully placed each item into a simple leather briefcase. Your grandfather wanted these to arrive together, he said calmly. Victoria nodded. Nothing about his plans was accidental. Before leaving the truck, she opened the journal one final time, hoping to steady herself before facing the board. As she gently turned another page, something slipped from between the worn sheets and landed softly on the seat. It was an old photograph with slightly faded edges. Victoria picked it up without thinking, but the moment her eyes settled on the image, she stopped breathing for an instant. The photograph showed a flooded country road nearly 15 years earlier. A younger Nathan stood beside an older pickup truck, his clothes soaked from heavy rain, while helping an elderly man climb safely from stranded sedan. The older gentleman wore a simple jacket and baseball cap, making him almost impossible to recognize at first glance. Victoria slowly turned the photograph over. On the back, her grandfather had written only one sentence. The day kindness saved your father before success ever knew his name. Nathan looked at the picture with quiet surprise. He studied the elderly man's face for several seconds before recognition slowly appeared. I remember that storm, he said softly. The river overflowed onto the highway. Several cars became trapped. Victoria looked at him with disbelief. That is my father. Nathan blinked once. Your father? She nodded, emotion filling her voice. He never told our family who helped him. He only said that a stranger refused every reward and disappeared before anyone could even ask for his name. Nathan smiled gently, almost embarrassed by the attention. He was cold and worried. Anyone would have stopped. Victoria slowly shook her head. Not everyone does. Silence settled between them once again, but this silence carried gratitude instead of uncertainty. Nathan stared through the windshield toward the busy streets beyond. Your grandfather knew, he murmured. Victoria looked down at the photograph. He must have learned afterward and quietly followed your life from that day forward. Nathan said nothing more. There was nothing to add. Some acts of kindness were never meant to become stories. They were simply choices made in ordinary moments that quietly shaped extraordinary futures. Victoria carefully placed the photograph inside the journal before closing it with renewed determination. As they approached the entrance of Hayes Industries, employees hurried across the plaza, carrying coffee cups and briefcases, completely unaware that history was walking through the front doors beside them. The polished marble lobby reflected morning sunlight, while the founder's bronze portrait stood quietly overlooking everyone who entered. Victoria paused before the portrait, remembering the anonymous message. Without hesitation, she removed the original company charter from the briefcase and placed it carefully beneath the portrait exactly as instructed. Nathan stood beside her without speaking. Several employees slowed their pace, curiously glancing toward the weather documents resting beneath the founder's image. None of them realized that within the next hour, the quiet promise made by one humble man many years ago would begin changing thousands of lives without a single raised voice. The executive boardroom overlooked the city through towering glass windows that filled the room with bright morning light. Yet the atmosphere felt unusually heavy as directors quietly took their seats around the polished walnut table. Leather folders rested neatly before every chair. Digital presentation screens displayed financial projections, and steaming cups of coffee waited untouched as conversations faded into cautious silence. Victoria entered carrying the worn leather briefcase, while Nathan followed several steps behind, dressed exactly as he had been in the Montana mountains. His faded flannel shirt and weathered boots looked completely out of place among tailored suits and polished shoes, yet he walked with the same calm confidence he had carried inside his small cabin. Several directors exchanged puzzled glances, uncertain why the company's chief executive officer had arrived with an unfamiliar single father instead of senior legal advisors. Victoria remained standing rather than taking her usual seat at the head of the table. Before today's agenda begins, she said calmly, there is something far more important than quarterly numbers. One director politely cleared his throat. We have already moved this meeting forward because time is limited. Victoria nodded. Exactly. That is why we cannot afford to make the wrong decision. She opened the briefcase and carefully removed the original company charter, placing it in the center of the table beside the leather journal. The room immediately grew quieter. Several older directors leaned forward with visible surprise. One whispered, almost to himself, I thought those originals were lost decades ago. Victoria then placed the sealed letters beside the charter, followed by the storage drive. Nothing here was lost, she said softly. It was protected until the right moment. Nathan quietly stepped back without saying a single word. He neither sought attention nor attempted to influence anyone. His presence alone reflected the quiet dignity that had guided every choice throughout his life. Victoria connected the storage drive to the presentation system. Instead of charts or financial reports, her grandfather's familiar voice filled the boardroom. Every conversation stopped instantly. The founder spoke with remarkable clarity about responsibility, integrity, and the sacred trust placed in every leader who accepted authority over the lives of working families. He explained that profit should never become more valuable than people and reminded future executives that every business decision echoed inside homes far beyond office walls. Nobody interrupted the recording. When it ended, the silence became even deeper than before. Victoria slowly opened the journal and read several passages describing the employee protections her grandfather had insisted should never be removed under any circumstance. She then unfolded the handwritten amendments attached to the original charter. The company's longtime legal counsel carefully examined every page before quietly standing. These amendments are authentic, he said. They were signed properly and remain legally binding. The restructuring proposal before this board directly conflicts with the founder's original governance documents. A wave of quiet realization spread across the room. Directors who had confidently supported the proposal only minutes earlier slowly closed their folders without speaking. Nobody argued. Nobody raised a voice. The evidence resting on the table carried greater authority than opinion ever could. Victoria finally looked toward Nathan. "Would you like to say anything?" He gently shook his head before answering in his calm, steady voice. "Your grandfather already said everything that needed to be heard. My opinion does not matter more than his promise." Those simple words settled over the room with extraordinary weight. One by one, board members looked toward the founder's portrait hanging above the far wall, then back toward the weathered documents that had survived years of silence. The chairman quietly removed the restructuring proposal from his folder, folded it once, and placed it aside. "Then there's only one responsible decision," he said. "We honor the promise that built this company." No applause followed. No celebration interrupted the moment. There was only complete silence, the kind of silence that appears when truth finally enters a room where it has been absent for far too long. 1 year later, the Montana mountains welcomed spring with quiet confidence. Snow had long disappeared from the valleys. Wildflowers covered the hillsides, and the same log cabin stood peacefully beneath the tall pine trees, exactly where it had always belonged. Very little had changed on the outside. Nathan Brooks still repaired his own fence, stacked firewood beside the porch, drove the same aging pickup truck, and greeted neighbors with the same gentle smile that had quietly shaped his life for years. Emma, now 9 years old, had grown taller, her laughter filling the mountain air as she carefully watered the small vegetable garden before helping her father gather fresh eggs from the chicken coop. Some blessings arrived with great celebration, while others quietly settled into ordinary mornings until they became part of everyday life. Hayes Industries had become one of the most respected companies in the country, not because it earned the highest profits, but because it rediscovered the purpose on which it had first been built. Employee protection programs expanded instead of disappearing. Long promised, retirement benefits were restored. New scholarships helped the children of workers pursue college degrees without carrying impossible financial burdens. Inside the company's headquarters, the founder's original charter now rested inside a glass display case beneath his portrait, reminding every visitor that integrity was never an outdated idea. Victoria Hayes often paused before that display, before beginning each workday. She no longer measured success only through financial reports. Instead, she visited manufacturing plants, listened to employees, and made decisions with the quiet wisdom her grandfather had hoped she would someday embrace. On a bright Saturday morning, she returned once again to the cabin, carrying nothing more than a small wooden box wrapped with a simple ribbon. Nathan welcomed her exactly as he had during the store a year earlier, with warmth rather than ceremony. Emma ran across the yard with an excited smile and gave Victoria a cheerful hug before proudly showing her the vegetables growing in the family garden. They shared homemade pie and fresh coffee on the front porch, while gentle mountain breezes carried the scent of pine trees across the valley. After a comfortable silence, Victoria placed the wooden box on the table. "This belonged to my grandfather," she said softly. "He asked that I give it to you only after I understood why." Nathan slowly opened the lid. Inside rested an old pocket watch, a fountain pen, and one final handwritten letter. He unfolded the page with careful hands. "Nathan, if this letter reaches you, then the promise survived. Thank you for protecting something that did not belong to you simply because it was the right thing to do. Wealth builds buildings. Character builds generations. Never doubt which one lasts longer." Nathan quietly smiled before looking toward Emma, who had been listening with thoughtful eyes. He gently handed her the pocket watch. "Someday this will remind you that kindness never arrives too late." Emma held the watch carefully as though it carried far more than polished metal and tiny moving gears. Victoria watched the moment with grateful eyes. She finally understood why her grandfather had trusted a man who had never asked for recognition. As the afternoon sunlight settled across the porch, nobody spoke for several peaceful minutes. Birds sang from the nearby trees. The wind softly moved through the mountains, and the old pickup remained parked beside the cabin exactly where it had been the night the storm first arrived. Nothing about Nathan's life appeared extraordinary to strangers passing along the quiet road. Yet somewhere beyond those mountains, thousands of families were sleeping a little more peacefully because one humble father had chosen dignity over attention, kindness over reward, and quiet courage over recognition. Sometimes the greatest miracles never announce themselves. They simply begin with one gentle knock on an ordinary door and end with a silence filled completely by grace.